Hey folks, Mike Murtis, Gamer Logic here, and today we're going to do something a little different. You know, when I got into collecting video game soundtracks on vinyl late December of last year, I could have never imagined where my collection would be at now as far as video game soundtracks go. It's pretty crazy, and when I thought about it, I was like, you know, I've done individual reviews of the records, and I've put a lot on my Bleeps on Wax series for you guys to listen to. But I never really talked about why I got into picking up these records and getting into game soundtracks the way I have. So I thought I'd first tell you a little history about my experience with the vinyl format and then do a little top 10. Now this top 10 isn't going to be a top 10 video game soundtrack release of 2017. This is going to be about my collection, what I personally have in my collection, and my top 10 out of that collection. And I have to say, you know, I started pulling records out, and I already had to start whittling down to 10. I thought I grabbed 10, I actually grabbed 18, and I was picking between them, so that was kind of cool. That it's just a very enjoyable hobby. But let's talk about my origin story, I guess, with vinyl records. And that first origin story goes back in the 1980s. You know, both my mom and my dad were very much into music, and we had quite the collection of vinyl records from Genesis, Rush, Def Leppard, the Beatles. I mean, so many great records. I was exposed to so many different types of genres of music, and I'm really thankful for that because it's obviously paid off in my music career far, far later on. And that's how I started getting used to seeing records and watching my dad clean them and use an anti-static gun and everything with it. And I just thought it was such a neat format, so different than tape or CD or anything else. So we kind of move along the years, and of course the vinyl format kind of shrinks. People are getting into compact discs. But I, in the mid to late 90s, really started getting into electronic music. Mostly that was through soundtracks. Well, when I decided to tip my hat into making electronic music, I started as a DJ first. And I started with my dad's pair of old Gerard turntables, learning how to, you know, put the record on, how to play it back, how to spin it back. It had no tone controls, so I was really having no way to really adjust the BPM or anything. And wanting to go beyond that, I got my first turntables, which I believe were belt-driven Staten turntables. And of course, along with those turntables, well, you have to have the records, right? So back then, if you were really to expand your collection, you had to go to record stores that were really specifically out there for DJs. And my friend Joe and myself, Joe was a fellow DJ who got into that music scene with me, which was really cool. We would go to record stores around the area, and that's how we pretty much increased our music catalog as far as being DJs went. And what a neat experience going into these stores and giving them your license or your state ID or your school ID in our case, so you could get a needle, put it on the turntable, and start playing, and just totally start experiencing these different records, these different genres, and just being mesmerized by it. Like, I really, really look back at those memories fondly because I had a lot of fun. My buddy Rick, who's actively DJing now, would come with us and listen to records, and it was just a great time. So that was really my first introduction into vinyl records myself, because now I was actively buying records for myself to use in my DJ sets. And the interesting thing was, especially if you compare it to now, is, you know, we were paying like 12 to 15 bucks, maybe a little cheaper than that, for a 8-minute per side vinyl record, which you hoped it was going to be a good tune. You hoped it was going to fit in with your sets, and there was a lot of money. It was very expensive, and that was kind of the downfall for me towards the end when I got out of DJing initially, is that I was spending so much money on records, and the gigs were just shrinking because there were so many DJs out there that just wanted to get a chance to play that there just wasn't room. So I kind of phased myself out of that and stuck to MP3s, and really while I was doing all this DJing, I was producing my own music anyway, so my focus went 100% towards that. And actually, thanks to my buddy Rick, I recently got back into DJing, and even though I'm doing that in a digital music format, I was able to reacquire a lot of my original records that I lost by hunting local record stores. It's really cool going in certain record stores and finding my scribble on the record sleeve of the BPM and everything I wrote on there. But there you go. That's kind of my quick introduction to why I have experience with the vinyl format. So what brought me back? Let's talk about that. As I was kind of reaching the apex of my video game library, my collection that I actively play, it just doesn't sit on a shelf. I actively play everything I have. I've just got to the point where there really isn't much out there for me. I really don't actively go to stores and hunt for deals on games or go online looking for retro video games. I've really reached kind of my apex on that, either because I have everything I want, or it's just too damn expensive to really get out there and get anything else. So now that that portion of things has kind of like sailed off into the distance, the vinyl records, this game soundtracks, seemed really appealing to me, mostly because they make great companion pieces to the games themselves. You know, games do have, if they come complete in box, they have their artwork, they have their instruction booklets, you have that piece of them with you. But with certain releases, some of them use like archival artwork, and it's cool looking through and seeing those original designs and then hearing that soundtrack, if it's mastered correctly, in just a completely different format. And a lot of people go, you know, it's kind of ridiculous, video game music on vinyl, why would you want to do that? You know, it's digital in the first place and it's going to an analog format. That makes no sense. And yeah, I can kind of see it, but for me, CD collecting and video game soundtracks never really appealed to me. And there's just something, again, very physical about vinyl that just makes it a completely different experience, from the sound to the way it's put on to the needle you're using. It's just very different. It's not very different to taking a video game cartridge and plugging it into the system rather than doing a CD or just playing a game from a menu. It's physical again, which is really cool. And you know, I was one of those nerdy kids growing up that had a boombox right next to his TV with the NES going and recording music from Ninja Gaiden, Castlevania, all of that stuff. So it isn't too far out of my wheelhouse. And now that I'm actively producing soundtracks for games, the Neon Noir being the most recent one, it kind of gives me a cool appreciation to go back and listen to it in a physical way. So that is what brought me into that. And why don't we start talking about the top 10 soundtracks that I personally have in my collection so far that I enjoy the most. And right here we got Zuntata, Taito Sound Team Arcade Classics Volume 1 featuring Night Striker, Metal Black, and Elevator Action returns. This is a very cool record. And the reason I picked this up is Zuntata makes incredible music in the first place. Massive amount of games they've done the music for with Taito. And my first experience with the group is Night Striker. And that takes me back to going to an arcade with my dad, walking in there and seeing a Japanese import version of Night Striker, the full arcade cabinet, the full full cockpit cabinet that you could get in and play. And you put your tokens in, you started the game, it was all lit up. The game looked amazing, and the sound and music were phenomenal. It put you into the game. That is probably one of my favorite arcade memories. So when I saw that they had a vinyl release of this, and really this was one of the first records I picked up, honestly, I thought it was pretty cool that Night Striker was available on there. And of course, there are other tracks available on here too, as I mentioned. Again, I don't know much about Metal Black, but I do know Elevator Action returns. And this has some arranged versions of those tracks. It has Blow Up and Colors of the Night, or Colors of Nights actually, and both of those are just these amazing jazz fusion tracks that just blow my mind. So energetic. Really love listening to those, and I believe I have this one on my channel, so I do recommend you check it out. Some great stuff on here. Like I said, Night Striker is excellent, but man, those Elevator Action Returns tracks, phenomenal. Next up is a game that I just recently finished a couple months ago, and this game has been out since 2015, and typically I do not buy soundtracks for games I either haven't played or haven't listened to. I know there are collectors out there that will buy anything under the sun that is video game related on vinyl, and I won't do that. There's some real turds out there. Some just isn't my style of music, and I don't need to have it all. I just want to have what I enjoy. But in this case, I listened to some samples of Axiom Verge and was absolutely blown away by how great it sounded. And the reason I never played this game before I bought it was just because I had so much going on, and I think at the time I was waiting for a Steam sale on it. Now a Steam sale happened, and I bought the game and I tried it out, and I was very impressed with it. The homage to Metroid is very, very obvious, but it's a good one. And I played maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes of it, and I put it down, and I think I went to something else that I was playing at the time. Well, I got a Switch, and I thought the Switch would be a great opportunity to use Axiom Verge with when it came out, because it's super portable, great to play, and I could just basically play it anywhere, right? The game itself is absolutely fantastic. Another reason I jumped to Axiom Verge on Switch is because Metroid 2, or Metroid Samus Returns, came out on the 3DS, and I really, really, really wanted to like that game. And its melee combat system that it had in it to reflect enemies back, and just the flow of the game, just so boring. It bored the crap out of me, which is really unfortunate. Again, I really wanted to like that game. So I was looking for that Metroid fix. This came out on Switch, and I went ahead and played it and enjoyed the crap out of it. So I actually knew the music first before I played the game, which was very interesting. But this is some great stuff. And if you love the soundtracks to Metroid, I highly recommend it. It's got such this environmental feel to it that if you put a pair of headphones on or listen to it through the speakers and you close your eyes, you can imagine this weird, strange, active world that you're in. Just some amazing sounding synths, and this is from a guy who by default isn't a musician. This is Thomas Happ, and the amazing thing about Thomas Happ, I have huge respect for him, because not only did he do the music for this game, he did the entire game. He completely developed this game himself, which is absolutely amazing. Hats off to the guy. Great soundtrack, great game, great record. This one, as well as the Taito Sound Team record, is available over at Ship to Shore Phono Co. Next up here, we have a soundtrack for a game that I own. Actually got a free copy of it, but I haven't played it yet. It looks phenomenal, it looks very cool, but the reason I picked this up is because the soundtrack for it was just insanely awesome. I have actually been producing synthwave music different from my regular dance music for the past couple years now, and you know, there are a ton of great synthwave artists out there. The big ones mostly being featured on this record. They decided to do a bunch of songs for it. So you have Carpenter Brut, you have Wave Shaper, Lorne, The Toxic Adventure, just great, Toxic Avenger I should say, just a great lineup of artists that contributed to this soundtrack. And while I don't have massive experience with the game, I will say that the soundtrack has been instrumental in improving my runtime for the 5Ks and various 3-mile runs I do on a regular basis. Just a great album altogether from start to finish. If you like hard-hitting synthwave music, definitely check this out. Next up, this is an absolute classic in my opinion, and this actually goes back to not only playing Streets of Rage 2 on the Genesis, but again in my DJ days, because my buddy Joe had a variety of game consoles and he had a Sega Genesis. And when we really started getting into DJing, you know, he would mention how much he loved the music from Streets of Rage 2. And I remember playing it and going, oh yeah, it did have a very dancey techno house soundtrack to it. And coming back to it all these years later and hearing it, it is, you know, Yuzo Koshiro is one of the most amazing video game composers out there, as well as just a great musician, period. He's done so many great soundtracks to games, the ActRaiser games, the East games, and of course, Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage 2, for me personally, is my favorite out of his Streets of Rage compositions from Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3, just because I really think he knew how to take advantage of the FM synthesis chip in the Genesis. And there's some tracks that I've actually covered from here myself, including Go Straight, the Player Select, and Dreamer. But this is from Datadisc, and Datadisc is kind of the Cadillac of doing video game music on the vinyl format. They really take their time to produce a high quality soundtrack and make sure the reproductions are the best they possibly can be, especially when you're dealing with the different models of Genesises that are out there. And I just, yeah, completely enjoy this record. It's a nice 2 LP set, gatefold. Highly recommend it if you are a fan of Streets of Rage, for sure. Ah, Mother. This one touches a personal chord with me, which I'll explain to you in a second. This is another one from Ship to Shore. And the unique thing about this soundtrack is that Mother, of course, is Earthbound, and Mother 1 is known as Earthbound 0 here in the US, the prequel to Earthbound on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. And I thought that this was just going to be a reproduction of soundtrack of all of the 8-bit songs in the game, and those are here, but the big difference with this is it actually contains the full arranged rock / Peter Gabriel-esque album that they did for this, and it's pretty amazing. Some of it's a little cheesy, but it does have some neat vocal lines. It's a really fun soundtrack, and it's a really emotional soundtrack. It's especially emotional for me because when this came out and after listening to it, I decided that I was going to finally go ahead and tackle Earthbound 0 and get through it. And at the time, as I was nearing the end of it and as I completed it, that main theme really stuck with me. All its different variations, because there's kind of an energetic version, a sad version of it, but it really pulls on the heartstrings. And it does so for me even more so now, because as I was finishing the game, my cat Frisky would always sit with me while I played through games, and she was kind of getting pretty old. You know, she was an 18-year-old cat, and we kind of had that feeling that her days were very numbered. And at the end of the game, they play that main theme again, and it's kind of sad. And I just remember looking over at my cat and telling her, "Hey, I just finished the game. This is awesome, huh, Frisky?" And, you know, she looked at me, but she just looked like there wasn't, like, a lot of life left in her. And, you know, it kind of really hit me like, oh, man, like, she's going to go at any time. And it's just kind of sad. You know, I really need to spend as much time with her as I can. So we all went to bed that night, and Frisky, of course, was like our favorite cat for sleeping with, because she loves sleeping with my wife, she loves sleeping with me, she liked to cuddle up with you and everything, so she did that like normal. And in the middle of the night, like, to our absolute horror, it was like one of the worst things you could possibly see as a pet owner. Frisky ended up having this massive grand mal seizure, and she was just making like the worst noises you could possibly imagine for a cat, and it sucked, guys. That was bad. So we came to find out later that she had like a tumor in her brain and that she was probably having seizures on a really regular basis, and we just had no idea because either we weren't home or she would go and hide and have these things. But it essentially came down to that we had to put her down. We had to put her down that very morning, and if you own a pet and you've been through that, that's like one of the worst things that can possibly happen. It really is. So they actually put this record out on CD format as well, and I decided to pick up the CD format for this particular one too, just so I could get some really good quality rips of it. And I had it on my iPhone, and I think I was driving to work, or I was coming back from work or something like that. But the main theme to this came on, and all I could think of is finishing this and Frisky sitting there next to me. And I don't cry very much. You know, I've been to people's funerals and stuff and haven't shed a tear. I mean, obviously I feel awful, but man, when it comes to pets or animals dying, like, I just break down. So I heard that song and I started thinking of her, and I just bawled my goddamn eyes out. So a little sad going back to this, but despite those bad memories, now when I listen to this, I just try to think of all the good memories I have with my cat and just people in general. But a great record, really emotional record, even without the fact that my cat passed away with it. So next up is the Hideo Kojima classic that was released here in North America on Sega CD, Snatcher, the cyberpunk adventure. And oh my god, does this soundtrack rock. Ship to Shore totally nailed this one when they did this. This is another 2 LP piece. They have selected tracks from the Snatcher Arrange album as well as the original soundtrack, and it just sounds great. I mean, there are so many fun tracks on this album. My favorite being One Night in Neo Kobe City. Again, this was one that was kind of announced back in December, and I don't think it came out till like March or April, but I knew when I saw it that I had to get it because it's just, there's something amazing about Snatcher, and I really, really enjoy the game. But you got Red March, Cold Step, Spreading Die Hard, Pleasure of Tension, another great track, The Entrance of Outer Heaven, a very eclectic collection of music here that really just takes me back anytime I listen to it. So highly recommended. Comes with some art. Very, very, very cool. I actually have 2 copies of this. I have one that actually the record looks like the original Konami logo, and I just had to pick up a crystal clear version because my Konami logo one skips. Oh my god, next up is Donkey Kong Country. And why is Donkey Kong Country among one of the top records here in this top 10? Well, I bought into the Donkey Kong hype when I was a kid. I totally got a minute. You know, that jungle cover of Donkey Kong and a VHS cassette tape arrived in my mailbox. I opened it up, popped it in, and learned everything I could about Donkey Kong Country on that tape, and got exposed to the music right away. So, of course, hearing the music and all that, I wanted to play the game. So when I played the game, I absolutely loved the music. And there was no big surprise that when I got my Nintendo Power Super Power Club catalog and they had the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack available on cassette tape and CD, that I begged my mom if I could have the cassette tape version because I listened to everything on my Walkman, and I played that tape to death. And I think I still may have it, I don't know. But it's never been re-released, it's never been like really remastered or anything. So this record right here, of course, is the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, and this comes from Moonshake Records. Now, Moonshake isn't officially affiliated or licensed with Nintendo or Sega or whatever. They're very, very much independent. Some could say bootlegs, but the guy who works on these things really takes his time and releases high quality records. This sounds great. Excellent customer service, excellent design, and there's so many favorites I have on here. Of course, you got Aquatic Ambience. I love Life in the Mines, Fear Factory. Oh man, this just really, really takes me back, and you gotta love the Johnny Cash tribute there. He always does that, which is really cool with all his record releases. Now, next up is Super Castlevania IV. And these are put out by Mondo, and Mondo took a little flack when they first came out with their video game soundtrack series covering the very first Castlevania, because they pull their source audio a lot of times from CD, and their first Castlevania release for Castlevania 1 was really, really loud on vinyl, and a lot of people didn't enjoy it, gave Mondo a lot of flack, and they definitely have learned their lesson from that. Super Castlevania 4 is probably a really, really high watermark for me as far as video game soundtracks go. I'll never forget seeing the 1992 January issue of Nintendo Power and seeing Simon swinging in on the cover and wanting to play that game. Finally getting an opportunity to do it and turning it on, hitting start, and hearing the theme of Simon for the first time. Whew, just an amazing soundtrack. What a weird soundtrack, but awesome. And when they announced this, you know, as one of my favorite soundtracks, I had to pick it up. The thing about Mondo, unfortunately, is that they do not use archival artwork. I don't know if they don't have the license to, or they just choose not to. From what I've seen, I think they just choose not to for whatever reason. And they usually have artists that they pay to do their covers. And sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss, and in this case I think it's a miss. And no offense to the artist, but I just don't think that this is really a good version of Simon Belmont. That and Dracula here just looks, I don't know, but other than the artwork, the album itself is fantastic. It really is. Now here's a good example of a soundtrack by Mondo that not only did they do a good job with the actual production of the vinyl record and the music on there, but they did a great job with the cover too. This is Castlevania III Dracula's Curse. And look at that artwork. Now this is custom artwork for the project, but you got all the heroes here, all the monsters, and then you flip it around on the other side here. You got Alucard, as well as all the monsters, or maybe that's actually Dracula now that I think about it. I can't actually remember, but man, that's cool artwork. That I really enjoy. So Mondo's actually going to be doing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and I'm a little paranoid about what that artwork is going to be like, because Dracula X Nocturne in the Moonlight has and always will have amazing artwork with it. That artwork with Alucard in the front of it is very cool, and I just hope that Mondo, whatever they do, whoever they commission to do that artwork, does it right, because they're going to have a lot of angry people if they don't. But back to Castlevania III Dracula's Curse. Man, I just love Castlevania music, and when I got to rent Castlevania 3 for the first time, I fell in love with the music right from the beginning song to beginning to Deja Vu, Demon Seed. So many songs on there were great. Now, I didn't know back then that the Japanese Famicom version of Castlevania 3 had a better sound chip, so the tracks over on that version of the game sounded significantly better than the NES version, right? That's the cool thing about this record, is that it is a 2 LP set, so each record contains the NES soundtrack and the Famicom soundtrack, so you can kind of listen and compare to both. Pretty cool. And again, just a phenomenal job on the production of this one. Sounds great. Phenomenal job on this one. And finally, this is actually a set. This is kind of cheating. It's like a 2-in-1 kind of deal, but I got the box set for this, so I'm going to do it my way. And at the top of my collection right now is Ninja Gaiden and Ninja Gaiden 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos. This is by Brave Wave, and they are pretty much up there as well, right next to Datadisc as far as producing a great compilation artwork from beginning to A to Z production of a vinyl soundtrack for video games produced on a 12-inch record. And when they announced this, and they announced a really limited box set, I had to get it because, man, you want to talk about what got me into video game music? that was all Ninja Gaiden. I'll never forget waking up. My dad was actually in the bedroom and he said, son, I got you something. And he handed me a copy of Ninja Gaiden. And popping that on, playing it, going from level to level and hearing that music and the stages and the cutscenes, just a phenomenal amount of music. And that of course goes on to Ninja Gaiden 2 because the music in that is excellent as well. Actually 2 probably has my favorite music out of the series. This has Ninja Gaiden as well as the Ninja Gaiden arcade soundtrack on it, and this has Ninja Gaiden 2 as well as Ninja Gaiden 3 on it. A tremendous release. Really happy to have the box set, as the box set is really cool, and it came with a rare limited print signed by all the music composers of this. So that is kind of my top 10 with all my video game soundtracks. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did, and if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in comments or hit me on the Facebook page. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace.